Hi, welcome to Tales of Dread. Werewolves and Dogman. They have been spotted all over the country, in forests, cities, rural areas, and towns. There have been reports of them killing livestock and frightening witnesses. Many people have reported seeing a massive black wolf that stands up on its hind legs and has glowing amber eyes. Some believe they are demons or supernatural beings. Others claim that their wild beasts are not to be trifled with. Tonight, we'll look at various Dogman encounters from across the western United States. Please like, share, and subscribe if you enjoy our content. If you have a run-in, you could leave it in the comments section below. Let the stories begin with Dogman on my property. A few years ago, I decided to contact the beaver yetis on my property. I call them yet because they have 3 toes rather than 5. I've always suspected that we had more than one cryptid on the property where I live, which is on a river and has about 18 acres of land. The Dogman has been spotted near Lime Road, which also runs alongside my river. I'm from Pueblo, Colorado, and I live on the St. Charles River, which empties into the Arkansas River. My researchers asked me to set up cameras to see if I could capture any Bigfoot activity. I did, and over the years I've photographed a variety of strange creatures. They're what I call hybrids. My encounter began when I was 8 years old in 1969, when a massive Bigfoot appeared in front of my father's tractor, and it has continued to this day with other creatures. I have a photo of a Dogman I caught in the river that is 4 feet wide. He has broad shoulders and is staring at the camera across from him. Yes, it is black, has ears that point inward, scars on its face, and appears to be unhappy about having his picture taken. When I got that picture, I felt very vindicated, and I blew it up in words so I could get a good look at the creature, which was quite ugly to say the least. It is a good daylight picture taken just as the sun is setting. Anyway, he's not standing in the picture, but he's buffed out squatting and staring at the camera, and that's not all. I keep my large dogs inside at night because I do not want them to be killed. I have an Irish Wolfhound mix and an older blue heeler. He isn't as large as an Irish Wolfhound, but he's just as fast and aggressive. I almost lost him last fall when he was 3 years old. When I got home and he wasn't there to greet me, I found him pretty beat up with a 6-inch groin cut that almost cut into his final artery. He had no bite marks, but he was beaten all over his body as if he had been pulverized. He was so swollen that you could push in on the swelling as if it were a semi-inflated balloon. I called my pastor neighbor, who confirmed that there had been a fight in the river around 9 a.m. She said she heard a dog screaming and it sounded horrible. As I previously stated, it was my dog that changed his personality. He is more cautious, and if these creatures are nearby, he will not leave my side, nor will he go to the Irish River. When he stands on his hind legs or raises his head to smell the air, he turns around and comes back to me. He is an ear, sight and smell dog. Something is happening in the river. I've had numerous encounters with these creatures on my property, and I've lost a few good dogs to that river. And what powers it? It chased my car 8 years ago. My brother John was driving home from his girlfriend's house on a county road outside of Boulder, Wyoming, about 11 miles south of Pinedale. It was around 1 o'clock or 2 a.m. when he saw what he described as a massive dog. He traversed down the slope on the south side of the road and began running along the side of his pickup. He was driving a 69 to 70 Ford F-150 highboy that had been factory lifted. The Dogman was running alongside him at 35 to 40 miles per hour. A 2 to 3 feet barrow ditch runs alongside the road, and the Dogman's head was level with it as he drove. So John estimates his height to be between 7 and 8 feet tall. It was dark in color, with gray or white on its muzzle running from its nose to under its amber eyes. He accelerated to 45 miles per hour, and the dogmen followed him, frequently peering inside the pickup. He said he lost it around 50 miles per hour, and that was all he would tell me. Snohomish and Dogman 1997 to 1998 was the year. My first encounter occurred late at night while driving home from Sultan to Snohomish, which is about 10 miles apart. I was with my mother, and we had just dropped a friend off at her home in Sultan. It was late October, and an unusual storm was raging that night, with tremendous cloud-to-cloud lightning and a very cold dry wind with no rain, bright flashes of light, loud thunder, and a lot of leaves blowing around. We were on a very dark stretch of road after dropping our friend off, with farmland on either side of Highway 2 and densely wooded hills on both sides. We were driving a 1991 Honda Accord when something caught my eye off to the left side of the road, which was a farm field with a break in the guardrail for a dirt road leading into the field. When we got to the break, I saw what appeared to be a large dog approaching, and it ran in front of our car, which I hit. It had to be huge to see its back over the hood of the car when you're sitting pretty low to the ground in an Honda Accord. Its fur was shaggy brown and molded with dark spots just like a hyena, and its front seemed higher up than its back. The headlights illuminated it as it ran in front of our car, and we felt it hit but didn't see it go up in the air or to the right side of the car. It ran from the left side of the highway to the right. We were driving west when my car began to swerve back and forth into the oncoming lane, and I just hoped that I could get it under control in time to avoid colliding with what appeared to be a Ford Aerostar van. A sense of calm came over me, and I felt as if my guardian angel had taken control of the steering because we had missed the van by just a few inches after going a little further, and we were both so shaken that I pulled over to the side. My mother wanted to go look for the dog because we both adore animals and felt bad about causing harm to one. But I had a bad feeling and was looking for this dog because it looked so strange to me. It was dark and stormy outside. It did not feel secure. And all I wanted to do was get home. When we first arrived in Monroe, the next town between our town and Sultan, we got back in the car and stopped at a small gas station. We got out to inspect the front of my car, certain that there would be evidence of a collision with something that large. We were traveling at about 60 miles per hour on the highway when we noticed a dent, some blood, but there was nothing there, not even a scratch. The entire experience had a supernatural feel to it. This dog, which was enormous and resembled a hyena, just didn't seem right. It didn't help that it was running in front of us, as if it wanted us to stop on that dark stretch of road and get out of my car, which we did. But we jumped right back in. I've never seen it stand on two legs. It ran on all fours, but there was something calculated about how it approached the highway, looked at our car, and ran in front of it. It appeared to be planned. It was a strange electromagnetic storm that night and the next day. People we knew who lived thousands of miles apart in all directions. Everyone was talking about the storm and a particularly loud thunderclap that shook everyone's house. They all thought it was directly overhead their house, but they were all thousands of miles apart. I have 3 other encounters that happened after this one, and I'm pretty sure it happened in October 1997, and no later than 1998 in Roscoe County, Texas. The first encounter occurred when I was young and attempting to sleep. I looked out the window and noticed it facing the backyard at the time. Back on topic, I now sleep in the basement, despite the fact that my brother and I used to get nervous looking out that window. At the time, my bed was perfectly aligned with the window. The beast was 3 feet away, staring at it. It had yellow eyes and a dog's long snout. Black for its face is similar to humans, minus the snout, gnarly long teeth, and fur all over its face. When it realized I was looking at it, it snarled quietly through the window and locked its gaze on me. I gradually drew the covers over my head. I then sobbed for what seemed like an eternity. Then I ran into my parents' room, crying, and told them it was all a dream. I thought that for about 8 years, until my sophomore year of high school, when my brother, a friend, and I went fishing. At the time, my brother loved peanut butter, and he brought a plate with a giant serving-sized spoon glob and some Ritz crackers. Surprisingly, there's a creek back there with some decent fish, mostly chub, but also bullhead, carp, green-bellied sunfish, crayfish, snapping turtles, brown trout, and I believe that's it. We thought it would be amusing to throw the chub there and leave them at our favorite spot, a massive fallen oak tree that serves as a natural bridge across the creek. It fell because of the weight it was carrying. One summer day, a friend and I went downstream. Meanwhile, my brother was fishing by himself. He went to pee and left the food on the other side of the creek. When he returned, he saw it running off with what he described as a bigfoot. He dashed over to his hysterical. We thought he was insane. So he started calling him Crazy Joey, and that made me think of my own strange running. Later, my friend was preoccupied with lawn work and packing. I was secretly afraid to go out, so Joe decided to return a month later and leave on his own. I wish I could have seen him to confirm, but the second time I saw him, I knew he was catching some fish. Because his line was tangled, he removed it from his fishing rod and respooled it. He claimed that he had to chase away the same thing that had stolen the food. I've previously witnessed something very similar to my own sighting. My brother, a friend, and a few others were planning to fish in an illegal location. We had no idea it was illegal, and it later turned out to be private property. When my friends and I go to new places, we have a tradition of casting base lures first and then using normal live bait. I wanted to pause because the fish were biting well in the creek. So they marched ahead of me across the oak to the quarry. After 12 minutes, I felt alone, so I took my bag, 2 poles, and tackle, and changed out near the log. I started walking when I saw what I thought was a large grey wolf. It made eye contact with me, and we locked gazes. After a while, I chased it off into the Freestone County, Texas prairie. I was out of my grandparents' house, as usual, looking for coyotes. It was April, and I was hiking through my next-door neighbor's land to get to the wooded land in the back. I had the feeling I was being followed by something to my right while hiking. I came to a halt and switched the red tint on my headlamp to my spotlight, but I saw nothing. Then I switched back to my headlamp, retracted my rifle, and resumed my hike. The time was 6:15 a.m. and the sun had just risen. I was sitting in a hide that I had fashioned the day before. That's when I noticed something hidden behind a clump of trees to my left. It was huddled. When I saw the creature staring back at me, I raised my rifle, looked through my scope, and froze. In a panic, I fired a shot. That's when it got up and ran deeper into the woods. I sat there for about another 25 minutes before deciding it was safe to go in, which I did later that day. I grabbed my grandfather and we both went out to where I had seen this creature stand up on 2 legs and flee. We measured it where I saw it, and it was about 7.5 to 8 feet tall. I'm terrified of going out late at night or early in the morning. There will never be another howl in the canyon. After attending a matter in Austin during the day, I decided to camp near a nearby state park on a private ranch owned by a lady I won't name. She was very nice, and I don't wish her any ill will. It was around 6:30 p.m. after dark. On November 18, 2016, I was invited to explore and camp anywhere on the property. I went to the most remote area in the back, near a creek. I was in the area when I heard screams from 2 males and 1 or 2 females. I thought to myself at first, damn, I'm going to have to listen to these drunks yell all night as they blast off their primal scream therapy routine. They'd made a campfire down by the creek. I was between 150 yards away, high on the ledge. The creek ran about 10 yards below me, and I caught a glimpse of their fire, but not of the people, only quick shadows began to emerge from behind the flames. It was strange, but I didn't think anything of it at the time. I then returned to where I had parked my car to gather firewood. I ignored the screams, but I noticed that there was no talking or voices commenting, no normal language, just screams that grew more intense, stronger, and longer in duration. Still, I didn't think it was too strange. I went about my business, trying in the dark to set up my camp and tent. I walked around, enjoying the open view of the sky after struggling with a flashlight in my mouth and scraped knees from laying out the bedding in the tent. The screams had evolved into barking and howling by this point. Earlier in my wood-gathering forge, I heard someone walking in the darkness and assumed it was a female who had come straight from the perimeter to use the restroom. I told the person in the dark that I was going to set up camp in this upper area, away from them. The person never responded. So I was confident that I had established a respectful territorial mark where I would not approach them and they would not approach me. Nonetheless, I had not considered anything strange up to that point. What concerned me was when, about an hour later, as I was about to start my fire and focus my attention, 3 or 4 howls combined into a very loud crescendo that drew my attention to the fact that the barking had become more intense and deeper. I initially assumed that these people were fighting with dogs, but that was not the case. And dog fights, you can hear the dogs tearing into each other and the men cheering them on. Here the barking seemed to be going in one direction, as if the dogs or coyotes were competing to outdo each other with barks wailing and howling. As my mind tried to comprehend what was going on, another possible scenario appeared to my reasoning capability. Maybe they'd set up speakers and we were listening to a recording of barks and howls, but it didn't make sense. The barking deepened once more, and the howling became more fierce and louder. That's when I decided I wouldn't be able to sleep there. Furthermore, from what I could tell, the sounds did not appear to be human-based. I took down the tent. I had struggled for nearly an hour to set up, and had left the stone ring and all the firewood of various lengths and thicknesses stacked and ready. As I stood alone, unarmed except for a long, heavy machete, I felt a sense of self-preservation wash over me. Before leaving, I gripped with my right hand. I crept as close to the ledge as I could get. I'd seen their campfire, but the barking and howling were too much for me. Only 25 yards away, I crept up quietly in defensive combat mode. I wished I had my tape recorder box with batteries so that my wife could hear what I was hearing because, as I previously stated, I couldn't go any deeper or closer to them, because the things voicing out the barking house were not people. I never saw them and don't think I ever will. On April 4, 2018, it attacked my neighbor's dog. I got home from work around midnight. I sat on my back porch, as I do most nights, lit a cigarette, and relaxed. Unlike most nights, however, I heard something new. I'm used to coyotes and barking dogs from my neighbors. In this case, however, I heard something new. It sounded like a deep howl, but instead of the usual dog sound, it was one tone and octaves higher. I heard it go from backyard to backyard, and the barking of the neighbor's dogs prompted one of my dogs to run out to the fence line, where she began to bark at something unseen. I stood up and said, "Hey, come back in, girl, it's okay." She turned to face me, frozen in fear. It took a few moments to shake her out of it, and she bolted to the back door. I decided to peek through the gate into the field behind the fence by the tree line. I noticed these amber-colored eyes about 5 feet above the ground. I decided to run in, grab my knife, and flee in the direction of the eyes. I could hear the house the entire time I was walking, but when I got close to where I first saw these eyes, every sound stopped, and you could literally hear a pin drop where I didn't see anything. I sensed the presence of something watching me, some kind of alpha predator I was unaware of. After a few moments, I returned to the porch and sat down for another smoke. The house restarted at that point. They came from my neighbor's backyard this time. They have 2 shepherds, and I'll never forget the sound they make. I first heard a guttural growl that was unlike anything I'd ever heard before. Then one of the shepherds shrieked, and then I heard the other get slammed against the fence, and then I heard my neighbor fire around, and then I heard this thing trail off. Just 3 nights ago, I heard the house start up again, but this time it was making its way through the tree line behind my house's backlot. I could hear its feet thumping and branches snapping. My instincts told me to seek cover, so I turned off the back porch light and let my eyes adjust. There was enough light to see the opening in the tree line, which was about 2 of me wide and 9 feet tall. I looked in the direction where the noises were coming from and saw it stand up. I first noticed the ears, which were tall and sharp like knives. I then noticed its head, broad shoulders, and long arms. It stood there staring at me for what seemed like an eternity before turning, ducked down a little, and took massive strides on 2 legs to walk away. This is the reason. This has been the subject of my investigation. I found out about an encounter in Firestone County not far from me. I'm hoping to get some solid evidence to show you all soon. For some context, we saw it in the window in April 1999. I grew up on 2 different ranches in the deserts southeast of New Mexico. As a result, I am well versed in the flora and fauna of our lovely state. I even used to track semi-professionally for hunters and trappers in our area. I'm familiar with the wildlife in the area. We were always on a very remote ranch, 50 to 75 miles from the nearest actual town. My senior year of high school, I moved out of my house as part of the DECA program in order to be closer to my school job. This is where it all begins in April of 1999. My boyfriend and I shared a trailer house with the couple just outside of Lakewood, New Mexico. We rented a room from them and occasionally watched their 2 children as part of our rental agreement for a few weeks. Several neighboring landowners had complained in April about wild dogs coming up from the river and harassing their dogs and scaring their livestock. One man even mentioned structural damage to one of his chicken coops. The couple we lived with had 2 dogs, both medium-sized terrier mixes, and neither of them was a coward. They'd gotten so scared of going outside at night that we had to make sure to let them out right at sunset and again at sunrise because they wouldn't leave the trailer house otherwise at night. On a Saturday night near the end of the month, around 11 p.m. we were sitting around watching TV and talking about stuff when the dogs began growling and barking at the window on the south wall of the bedroom, which was unusual behavior for them. So we all got up to find out what they were talking about. When we arrived, the dogs' barking had shifted away from the window and seemed to be barking at the wall and along the wall, as if they could smell something there, but it was moving. It was very strange, and when they got to the end of the room, their barking just went crazy, and we all heard this loud thump and scuffling sound from further down the wall at the same time. It was strong enough that we could feel it. The dogs had completely lost it at this point. They screamed a high-pitched whine and dove under the bed. We all dashed out of the bedroom, down the hall, and into the kitchen to find out what was going on. Peering out the kitchen window was pointless because it was late. The sky was cloudy, and the moon wasn't even visible. We went into the living room after hearing the scuffling noise from further down the house. At this point, we were all completely perplexed. The next few moments seemed to move in slow motion as, from the shoulders up, what I can only describe as a man-dog appeared in the living room window from the left and looked right in on us through the glass. It had human shoulders and short sleek hair, but it had the head of a Rottweiler and the teeth, my God, the teeth on this thing. All four of us screamed at about the same time, and I guess that scared it off because it just vanished. That image is indelible in my mind. It's also worth noting that this was a trailer house. So the bottom of that window was easily 6 feet off the ground, implying that this thing was at least 7 feet tall. It couldn't have stood up and looked at us like that in the window, no matter how big the dog or wolf was. Despite my warnings, the guys grabbed their shotguns and bolted out the door. I'm guessing they were out there looking for it for about 20 minutes before returning inside and saying they couldn't see anything. The light from the house shining in on it, as well as its proximity to the window, were the only reasons we noticed it in the first place. That night, none of us slept well. It was just creepy. The next morning, I got up early and went outside to see if there were any tracks to identify what the hell it was, the grass and weeds right beside the house. I pretty much hit every track that was made there. Although I did discover evidence that something had clawed at the siding along the bottom of the house, as well as a couple of locations where the thump and scuffling sounds from the night before. I then decided to follow the guy's tracks, which is when I made a second, very unsettling discovery. The guys left clear tracks in the sandy dirt, as did whatever was out there, which circled them at a distance of about 40 feet the entire time they were out there. The tracks were massive canine and switched back and forth from 4 to 4, implying that it was walking bipedally for at least half of the time it circled them. Just creepy as hell. Mineral County, Nevada's werewolf. I grew up in the town of Hawthorne. Nevada is the location. Walker Lake is right next to Hawthorne. The main highway leading from Hawthorne, Reno is Highway 95, which can be seen on Google Earth running directly between Walker Lake and a mountain range. This results in a small stretch of highway known affectionately as the Cliffs by locals. My grandparents, mother, and I were 14 years old when we returned home late from a long day of doctor's appointments in Reno. My grandfather was driving, and we arrived at the cliffs around 11:30 p.m. About a third of the way around the cliffs heading toward Hawthorne. There is a small area where the road pulls away from the mountain and creates a small alcove area. As we started to come up on it, we saw a large animal crossing the road dragging another animal in its mouth, and it stopped in this alcove. Grandpa thought at first that so he slowed down when we got within 100 feet of it and turned on the car's headlights. It wasn't a mountain lion, which surprised us. We only had a few seconds to look at it after Grandpa turned on the brights, because as soon as the light hit whatever the hell that thing was, it turned to look at us 1 second and then leapt straight up the side of the mountain and out of sight, leaving the mangled body of a fox behind. Grandpa jumped into the old Buick we were in, waking up the woman in the back seat. I'd never seen my grandfather so terrified before, but he was visibly shaken afterwards. I recall the sheer size of the thing and how it jumped like a human, arms reaching up almost over its head to the rocks. It had thick, long fur. However, muscle definition could be seen. I don't remember the facial features, but I remember being terrified when that thing turned and stared at the car with bright yellow eyes. I even threw up on myself. I've been almost face to face with a polar bear before, and I wasn't nearly as terrified as we were when we saw this thing. I no longer believe in werewolves, and I haven't seen anything similar since. But I never want to see it again. Dogman from Nebraska, Friday, October 5, 2016. My brother and I were standing at our usual corner bus stop, waiting for our bus. It's about 3 blocks from our house, and a densely wooded creek is about 1 to 2 blocks behind our bus stop. The first thing I noticed was that my brother was stiffly standing there, staring down the long road. I gently shook him and inquired as to what he was looking at. Almost immediately, he shushed me. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I noticed a large black figure darting across the street on 2 legs to the line of houses on the other side before disappearing. Thankfully, our bus arrived soon after. County of Lynn, March 2017 in Oregon. The time was 2:30 a.m. Another night of insomnia brought on by back pain. I was lying on my side, reading, when my next-door neighbor's motion detector lights went off. This occurs on occasion, and when it does, it illuminates the entire side of my house. We've been here for 9 years, and I've never seen anything walk past my bedroom window at night, despite the fact that I was facing my large bedroom window. When I noticed the very bright motion detector going off, I looked up and saw the side of a silhouette of a Dogman. I exclaimed, "Holy crap! It was passing through my bedroom window. I saw it from mid-shoulder up. Its shoulders were massive, as was its head. It had long snout and pointed ears like a German shepherd dog. Its mouth was slightly open, and I noticed a large tongue lolling to the side of its mouth. When I saw this creature and said those words, I swear it slowed down, smirked, and then continued on its way. That was the only thing I saw that night. However, last week, while in my bedroom, I heard something large land on the ground behind my bedroom wall. There are no windows on that wall. I heard deep, really deep raspy breathing. I just started praying, pleading Jesus' blood over my house grounds and everything. I do this most nights, but I sometimes forget I'm awake until 3 a.m. or later as a result of severe spinal issues and fibromyalgia. We live in a lovely manufactured home neighborhood. There are many trees around here, and it is close to canals, large open fields, and woods. I know this is what I saw, but the fact that I saw it still astounds me. Why is this the case when so many others are seeing them? I guess I just assumed that because I am in the house the majority of the time due to my house, I would never see them. My neighbor's house is about 10 feet away from ours. My husband stepped outside. I finally got the courage to tell him what had happened and measured the area by the window a few weeks later. That Dogman had to be 8 feet tall. What worries me the most is that no one in the police or government will warn people about their presence. People walk around with a false sense of security. I'm sure I did. I'm not even going to try to go for a walk outside anymore. And, yes, I have warned my neighbors with the security light. I can't think of anything else right now. But it's important for you to know that a homeless woman was camping out by the river in Albany several years ago. She was discovered dead, and her tent was completely destroyed. I believe the police report in the newspaper stated she was ripped up as well, but I honestly can't recall any specifics. To the best of my ability. No one was ever apprehended for that crime. This is a sleepy little town. Approximately 50,000 people. We are no longer receiving the newspaper. So I'm not sure if this happened again. I am aware of a couple who saw a Dogman in the same area. It terrified them greatly. That was mentioned on another YouTube channel. I simply want people to be aware so that they do not go out at night, especially near the river. However, we are not near a river. And I saw one in the dead of night. Thank you for reading this report, and taking the time to do so. I witnessed it in Oklahoma. Back in the early 1990s, when I was about 19 years old. I used to work nights unloading trucks at a chain retail department store before they all became superstores. Anyway, several people began to notice that a coworker appeared to be sleeping poorly one night. She told us during a break that she had to leave early, and take the long route to work and back because of something she had witnessed. she used to take a road called Moccasin Trail. But a week before, as she was turning onto that road on her way to work, she claimed to have seen a huge werewolf sitting in the grass just watching cars go by. She said she'd seen it 4 or 5 times and couldn't take it any longer. She claimed she was afraid this thing would follow her, so she avoided that road entirely. She described the sighting as follows: when she turned onto this road, her headlights illuminated the embankment across the road just enough for her to see this large werewolf sitting about 30 feet up on the embankment. She claimed it would sit in the grass, legs stretched out in front of it. She described it as frequently leaning back, supporting itself on one or both of its elbows, and posing leisurely while watching cars pass by. She appeared to be deeply disturbed by her encounters over the years. I've heard a few stories about strange occurrences in that area. Native Americans mentioned other shapeshifters in the area. I'm not sure if that has anything to do with the girl sighting. I just thought it was noteworthy. In February of 2016, a predator was spotted in Oklahoma. Around 3 a.m., I heard my dog barking and growling. I got up one night and went to the back door to see what she was barking at. I noticed her running up and down the backyard fence line, barking, growling, and urinating all over it with her tail tucked in. My immediate thought was that there was a predator nearby. Something wasn't right. I narrowed my eyes to see what she was barking at and whispered, "Holy shit." I saw something black that was bent over in a circle and had the mane of a lion. After about 15 seconds of staring at it, I decided to dash to my bedroom and get my head-wrapped light. I put it on my head and ran to the back, where it was still there. I carefully turned on the light, and directed it directly at it. When I did that, it turned around and looked directly at me. Then it dashed down the fence line, followed by a smaller one. The best way I can describe it, is that it was the size of a lion. It had yellow eyes, pointed ears, massive shoulders, and a massive chest. It moved on all fours. This thing was also so quick that it only took about 2 seconds to run down the entire fence line. This wolf was significantly faster than my dog. I called my wife and told her what had happened. I then went to the computer and looked up images of huge wolves in America. I discovered a cartoon of a drawing done by someone, and its head in mane looked exactly like what I saw. It was known as the Dogman. It occurred in Cleveland in June of 2000. I'd been up all night playing video games at a friend's house in Tribby. I didn't want to spend the night there. So I said my goodbyes and returned home. I knew my car was making a strange noise, but I was confident I could get home. I was driving down a long dark stretch of highway with nothing but forest and a few sparse country houses for company. I was approaching the top of a long hill when my car abruptly stopped pulling forward. The engine revved, but no gears engaged. My CV joint just died. That was something I was hoping wouldn't happen. I had no way of getting back home. So I drove down the road, into neutral, and onto a side road. I considered staying in the car and sleeping, but something told me not to. I had the uneasy feeling that I was being watched, so I grabbed my video game case and my machete made from a lawnmower blade and began walking. I kept getting the impression that I was being watched and that I was being followed. I kept looking behind me and saw nothing, but when a car passed by in the opposite direction, its headlights illuminated the area, and I saw something in the ditch hunched down low behind me. It was enormous, and I could tell it looked like an animal, but had distinct humanoid features. It appeared to have arms, but its head was mostly canine. Its head was very large, and when the lights hit it, its eyes glowed red. I'd seen enough werewolf movies to know that this wasn't going to end well. So I began to run. That wasn't the best option because I know predators like to chase things that run away from them. When the car passed and the creature darted into the trees, I decided it was time to flee. As a result, I did. I ran for about a quarter mile and then looked back but saw nothing. So I kept walking, looking behind me, and to the side where the tree line was. I knew it was still out there, probably following me, and while I was scared, I was also ready to defend myself with my machete if necessary. I ascended another hill and noticed a farmhouse in the distance to my left down a long dirt driveway. I could see a guy out there messing with his trucks because the moon was almost full and the area around the house was clear. He turned on a spotlight on his truck and spotted me as I walked by. I kept walking because his property had a no trespassing sign and many people out there wouldn't hesitate to unload on a strange trespasser. I knew it was getting closer, probably closer now, and I was about to turn around and face it when another car came over the top of the hill and passed me again, this time going behind me. I followed with my eyes and noticed it was a cop this time. So I dropped my machete on the edge of the grass and waved as he passed. His lights hit the ditch as well and I saw the Dogman was very close, but it darted into the trees yet again. Thankfully the cops stopped and turned around a moment later. He returned and asked what I was doing out there. So I told him about what happened to my car. I didn't mention the Dogman, who might have thought I was insane, but I did ask him for a ride home. He agreed after checking to make sure my car wasn't blocking the road. He agreed to take me home after we checked it. I'm not sure what would have happened if he hadn't arrived that night, and it was the only time I was genuinely pleased to see a police officer. In Kansas, there are dogmen. The early 2000s. As a kid, if you know anything about Kansas, you'll know it's dry, flat, and devoid of much forestry. I grew up on a farm out in the middle of nowhere. I recall having our own area set up outside, complete with swings and monkey bars. A large patch of overgrown weeds nearby was nearly 6 feet tall in some places. I hated playing on the play set because I'd occasionally see red eyes from within the weed patch around sunset. I informed my grandparents, who dismissed it as coyotes. However, one day I needed answers and went to the weeds. On closer inspection, I noticed a creature that resembled a dog with shaggy white fur, and its front paws reminded me of a gorilla's. I never saw the creature again in that weed patch after it moved away from me. A year has passed. I noticed the same figure lurking in the shadows outside the house. I was so terrified that my mother couldn't get me to leave the house for a long time, except to go to school. I haven't seen this humanoid in a long time. I'm also not sure if it's the fabled Dogman who appeared in the middle of the night in the summer of 2016. I was driving home alone after doing some shopping in a nearby town, just driving and listening to the radio. On a beautiful summer day, it was just before sunset. I was looking up at the sky because it was such a vibrant orange. I made the first turn while driving through some S-curves in the road and saw some deer dart across the road. I immediately hit the brakes to slow down, not knowing if there would be more on the other side of the road, which drops down a steep embankment to a farm field. I had slowed the car to scan the tree line for more deer when this thing jumped out of the woods and started running after the deer. He landed in the middle of the road and cleared the remainder of it. It's difficult to comprehend what I saw on his next solo ride, but it sounds like the descriptions that people have claimed. A grey figure wore a short, sleek coat. This creature had no tail, as far as I could tell. It was on all fours and about the size of a deer. His head, on the other hand, was very strange. It had the appearance of a dog head, with cropped pointed ears and a very short muzzle. When he crossed, he briefly turned his head towards me, and his eyes, I wouldn't say glowed, but they weren't normal animal eyes. They were a dull yellow color that really stood out. His body was the most perplexing to me because it moved in the manner of a human attempting to run on all fours. Its gait appeared sloppy, as if he was loping across the road. It had a muscular front end but a thin, almost sickly-looking abdominal area and hind legs. I lost sight of him over the embankment once he was across the road. I was perplexed by what I saw. I didn't tell anyone right away because I was afraid they'd think I was crazy. I had been looking for answers ever since, but had come up empty-handed. I eventually told my husband and one close friend, but neither had heard anything resembling my description. I'm still not certain that I saw a dog, man, but it's the only thing that sounds remotely similar to what I saw. Jackson County's Beast, 13th of September, 2013. Before I get into my encounter, I should mention that I'd been studying wolves and their behavior for about 3 years prior to this one. And I know this because Jackson County is approximately 656 square miles in size with a population of approximately 675,000 people. And, with wildlife such as deer, livestock, and predators such as coyotes and foxes, a large predator such as a wolf would be unlikely to be lurking in the sparse woodlands. The average wolf territory is 13 to 2,400 square miles, and such a massive creature could easily live in Jackson County alone. This could be the same dog and wolf man that other people have seen. Anyway, back to the meeting. I was just sitting in the living room on my laptop, watching people blow stuff up. When I needed to use the restroom, I put the laptop down, put my headphones on the keyboard, and got out of the chair. I'm not a psychic or a medium or anything, but I have a sort of sixth sense where I can tell if something is watching me, and I knew something was watching me because we have a huge window on the wall just above the couch. It was also a particularly cold night. As a result, the windows captured things like breath fairly well. I turned to the window, thinking that whatever it was watching me from there, I'd see it because it had to be either standing on something or as tall as the devil himself to see into our trailer's window, which was about 8 feet off the ground, with the top of it being about 11 feet. When I looked over to see the window, all I saw was the floodlights on and something ducking under the window like a kid playing hide and seek. I didn't think much of it because our neighbors were drug addicts and alcoholics who frequently came to look in our windows, and every opening to the house was also locked, so I had nothing to worry about. I went to the bathroom, then washed my hands and returned to the laptop. I noticed that the floodlights had gone out, so whatever it was had vanished, and I didn't think anything else of it. I returned to watching people blow things up on YouTube. I should also mention that my eyes are sharp enough to spot a bird in a tree from about 50 feet away. So it's no surprise that when the floodlights came back on, I looked up from the screen, expecting to see a drunken or high idiot peering in with a stupid expression on his face. But what I saw stopped me in my tracks. It was a huge wolf looking at me with dirty amber yellow eyes. Its ears looked torn or cropped or something, and the face looked human-like, not a full human face, but more like the jawline looked masculine and human compared to the rest of its face. It was so tall that the top of its head was halfway up the window, and if I had to guess how wide it was, I'd say maybe the width of my shoulders. Its lips were curled back and it seemed to be snarling, though I couldn't hear if it was, and its breath caught on the cold glass. Whatever it was, it had to have wolfish instincts. So I did the only thing I knew how to do: avoid eye contact and make yourself look as small as possible while exposing your throat and underside. This is a common submissive posture. Even though I was terrified, I knew that making eye contact would make me appear as a challenger, while running would make me appear as prey. I was in the submissive position. It must have worked because it just hit the window, causing the entire trailer to shake, and then it vanished. I hadn't heard or seen anything else since, though I occasionally hear a howl from the back roads. God help the idiot who decides to go looking for this thing. I can tell you that whatever it was not friendly, because it would not have slammed my window as hard and would not have been growling as if I had taken its food, despite the fact that it almost assaulted my window. I could understand why it was upset. After all, I was an intruder and possibly a threat to its existence and prey. It's best to just stay out of its way and respect it. It is, after all, one of God's many strange creatures in this world. On June 6, 2015, stay out of the woods. My school was on summer vacation. I was relaxing at home, watching TV. Before I go into more detail, I got bored and went outside to see if I could do anything with my chickens, such as feed them worms and snails. I should explain where I live. my house was on the outskirts of the city where I live. At the time, I had about 5 or 7 chickens, and we hadn't expanded the coop. So it was a small pen connecting 2 sides of the wooden and sturdy chicken coop. The only way into the coop is through the trapdoor attached to the large door. And there are 3 windows. One window is on one side of the door, and the other is on the other. The third window is a large one, and they all have traps attached to them so they can be closed. The back pasture is 7 acres of woodland that we call home. And if you've ever been back there, you'll notice that it's a popular deer habitat. There was also a wild boar roaming around at the time, which I'm not sure how it got there. We had been having trouble with poachers for quite a while, considering the population of deer in the woods. One poacher had installed a motion-activated trail camera. An old rusted deer stand had been hung on a tree for a long time, and the tree had grown around it. Beyond our wooded acres, there are large cornfields owned by our neighbors, as well as a forest. I don't know what the forest is like beyond the field since we've never been there. I went outside to do something with my chickens and I had brought along a bucket of corn for feeding the deer. After, when I walked out of my home, I saw a doe was sitting in the tall grass. I thought it was sleeping since its head had been down and wasn't moving. Being the curious little nut, I was decided that I would sneak up on the deer and get a picture of it to show my mother. When she got home from work, I crept as silently as I could across the yard that separated me from the deer. I should also mention that we have a clearing with a burn pit in it that was filled with cedar branches. I was creeping across my yard towards the deer, and when I had cleared the burn pit and was about 10 yards from it, I realized that the deer wasn't asleep, but it was dead. It was the most disgusting sight I'd ever seen. Its intestines were completely gone. The flesh on the body of the doe shredded to pieces and blood absolutely everywhere. It looked as if it had been sitting there for a while, and it smelt like it too. Most of the blood was dried and the air reeked with the stench of rotting flesh, urine and what seemed to be like a hint of wet dog. Something that creeped me out about the scene was, although it was a rotting carcass, there were no insects at all around it. It was as if the usual lively forest was deader than the deer. Not even the neighbor's cattle made a sound. It looked as if the poor deer had simply been left after being brutally attacked and half-eaten, which it most likely was. I left the bucket at the beginning of the trail thinking that I would come out later with my mother and grain the deer when she got home. Then I started to walk back to the house. I had barely taken a few steps when I heard a low snarling growl that sounded like a wolf, although it seemed distorted as if it were being played on an old radio against my better judgment. I turned my head around and I saw what looked like the biggest freaking werewolf you'd ever seen. It was on all fours. Its fur was black and matted in places. Its face was what you'd expect a wolf to look like, although it was broad and the muzzle seemed a little short, although the way it was curling, its lips made it look as if its snout was plenty long, and its eyes were yellow, not a bright yellow, like the yellow of a flower or the sun, but a dim amber, dark red yellow, if that makes sense. Its ears look like that of a Doberman pincer with a cropped effect. Its front legs were long and it looked as if it were a bodybuilder. Its paws, if you can even call them paws, looked like huge hands with long claws at the end of them. It stood up and I heard the most sickening popping sound you could ever imagine. It sounded like the sound of popping joints, but it seemed amplified as if it were being played through a microphone and the sound was coming out of a loudspeaker. Its body looked like a bodybuilder is pumped up on steroids. It was so big it had no tail that I could tell, and it seemed to tower over me, although I was a good 10 meters from it. I was about 5 foot 4 inches at the time and I came nowhere close to its height. It was so tall that the tip of its ears could almost touch the top of a young cedar. It let out a loud howl which sounded more like a roar and it charged me, doing the only thing I knew to do. While hyped up on fear and adrenaline, I began to run away from it. I remember clearing my yard in what seemed like hours, but was most likely only a few seconds, and running inside, slamming and locking all the doors and windows. As I calmed down a small bit, I had realized that if it had really wanted to kill me, that it would have. That what I had experienced was not an attack charge, but a bluff. I was lucky to get away with my life. Although this happened almost 2 years ago, it still terrifies me to think about it. The deer was gone the next day, and ever since that evening I have been weary around the woods, only going in them in broad daylight only when I absolutely had to, and never without a weapon. Sadly, I cannot say that I am one of those people that have stopped experiencing things after the encounter, although I only had nightmares for a month after that day. In June nothing really started to happen again until about 2 months ago, when I was staying up at night playing on the laptop. I had started to hear things moving around on the porch and turned on the light to see the shape of something huge, disappearing behind the corner of my house. There was also one of the rare times. I went to the woods after the first encounter. When I was helping my mother clear brush from the hunting clearing, I was going to get the mower and was walking the trail to do so when I heard bipedal footsteps following me off to my side. They stopped whenever I stopped and I eventually ran out of the woods, and I haven't been back since. I asked my late grandmother about the creature I had seen in the woods, and she informed me that there was something called the wolf head man that stocked the cans, a tribe preying on small children that strayed too far from their teepees. Later, I was informed by my history teacher that my house has actually been built on a tribal burial ground, and I have since been wondering that if that had anything to do with it. I hadn't heard about the wolf head man before. She had told me about it when I saw that there were several eyewitness reports that were proved to be truthful. It made me feel a lot better about coming out with this information. I had an attempt to tell people previous to this submission, but everyone either said I was stupid, crazy, or just plain lying. One thing's for certain: I'm not stupid. I am not crazy, and I am most definitely not a liar. I know what I saw, and what I saw was a dog man. Dog. Dogman? Not Bigfoot 2013. I wasn't there, but my son's son-in-law and their friends saw a dogman. My son called me all freaked out that they had seen a Bigfoot because he knows I believe in Bigfoots. Now, my son always made fun of me for believing in Bigfoots. He asked me, "Dad, can Bigfoots run on all fours?" I said yes. "Why do you ask?" And he said, "Dad, we just saw one out spotlighting rabbits." I asked him to describe what it looked like and he said they were hunting rabbits with a spotlight and he saw something hunched over. He said he then yelled to the others and let them know that he had seen something and then started to shine his light on it. At first he thought it was a large bird because it was down like it was eating something, then it stood up on its hind legs and spread its arms out wide. And then when the other two came to look at it, it dropped down, and took off faster than anything they had ever seen before. He said it had a dog snout and was covered in fur, but you could see it was very muscular. Now my son is 62 and he felt it stood as tall or taller than him. When it took off they ran after it and watched it jump and clear a huge rock pile in one leap like nothing. That scared them, and they all ran back to their car to get out of there. I spoke to all three, and they had the same story and described it the same way. I told my son that that's not a Bigfoot because Bigfoot don't have dog snouts. I told him you saw a dogman. It's funny that this happened around a lot of cornfields. The area also had caves and was covered in sagebrush. I saw it in Idaho Falls. My name is Angela. I am a 47-year-old female from Idaho Falls, Idaho. I grew up in Idaho and I am an avid animal lover, especially wolves. Since I was very young, I am writing to tell you about my dogman encounter when I was around 16 or 17 years old. This would have been right around 1986 or 1987. Anyway, myself, my friend and my other friend decided one night to go into our local cemetery and look for what is called the knocking grave and the werewolf grave. We found the knocking grave and discovered that it is just a loose board which vibrates back when you knock on the grave. We never found the werewolf grave. So we just chalked it up as being a myth. We decided to go back to the car and we were talking when my friends A and B decided they wanted some alone time. They were a couple at the time. I got out of the car and decided to walk around the cemetery by myself. It was a beautiful night with a full moon shining above, ironic. I know I was walking along looking at the old gravestones and thinking of how sad it is that so many people are completely forgotten after they die. When I heard a strange sound to my left. I was standing near a mausoleum looking down into another part of the cemetery. I heard the sound again and started walking towards it. It sounded as though something was crunching on something. I stood there for a minute listening. I immediately noticed how quiet it had gotten in the cemetery and the hair stood up on my neck and arms. Usually there was noise from cars or dogs barking or crickets or something like that. but there was nothing. I then saw a silhouette of something big and black standing a little ways away from me, around 25 feet away. To be exact. Something told me to back away slowly and leave now, but I ignored it. I crept closer to the creature, never taking my eyes off of it. My eyes had adjusted to the darkness and I could see very well, especially with the moonlight helping light up the night. What I saw terrified me, and also piqued my curiosity. The creature first looked like a huge wolf, but the front legs and torso were abnormally large, and the back legs were huge as well. It had a long furry tail behind it, just like a wolf's tail. The head was huge and it had long pointed ears with stuffs for the tips. From what I could see, it was leaning down and was eating something. The sounds I had heard was the crunching it made when it bit into whatever it was eating. I was excited because I had always wanted to see a wild wolf and I thought that was what I was looking at. I figured that maybe a wolf had escaped the zoo, which was right next door to the cemetery, and had caught a rabbit or something. I realized though that the zoo didn't have a wolf in it and hadn't had one for years. That made me even more excited and curious. I stared at this creature for about a minute or so, and then I shifted my legs to get more comfortable, and I must have stepped on a twig or scuffled my feet because the creature suddenly stopped eating, looked up and turned its head my way. It then stood up on its back legs and I heard a loud pop, and that is when I realized that this was not a huge wolf. It was black and had a few brownish streaks in it, for when it stood up I saw its head, chest, stomach and lower body. The shoulders and chest were massive and covered in fur that tapered down as you looked at the stomach area and legs. It reminded me of a bodybuilder on steroids because of how muscular it was. As it stood there, it started to sniff the air and it stopped and stared my way. The eyes were a deep orange gold and seemed to glow in the moonlight. It looked at me and I felt a fear grow deep within me that I had never felt before. I knew it saw me and I knew I had made a huge mistake by not leaving. When I first got that bad feeling, it felt as though everything went cold and this creature could see within my soul. It stared at me for a minute, and then it opened its mouth and it bared its teeth at me as if it was smiling. The teeth were huge and yellowish white, and they looked very sharp, just right for ripping its prey apart. It never took its eyes off of me. It then lifted its arm and took a bite out of whatever it was eating. I then realized the sound I had heard was that crunching bone and tearing flesh as it ate its meal. The hands were like elongated paws, and at the end of each finger were huge black claws that gripped the leg it was eating. I stood there watching and eat for what seemed like hours when it could have only been a few moments. He never took his eyes off me. The fear I felt overwhelmed me. I felt sick and I was visibly shaking, and so I did. The one thing I had been taught to never do when confronted with a predator, I turned and I ran as fast as I could back to that car. I didn't care. I couldn't get his eyes out of my head, and that smile, those teeth. I could just imagine it catching me and ripping me to shreds as I ran. I made it to the car though, flung open the door and jumped in, screaming for both of my friends to start the car and get us the hell out of there. They asked me what was wrong and I just yelled at them to go. Now they both looked at me and saw the terrified look on my face. So they started up the car and we left, and I never went back to that cemetery again. Later that night I told both of my friends what I had seen, and they both just laughed at me and told me it was just my mind playing tricks on me, which made me feel hurt that they didn't believe me, but I could hardly believe it myself. I saw a werewolf, or what is referred to as a dogman, and I will never forget it. Please, if you're listening to this, don't ever traverse through the Idaho Falls Cemetery. Well, I'm 24 years old, male, and live in the middle of nowhere literally. I will be short and simple about my encounter. I was getting home late one day after dropping my sister off of the airport in Lamar, Colorado. I live on approximately 250 acres of land just under 7 miles north of the Oklahoma border. I have a coyote trap line that runs around my property. After checking the first 2 traps, I decided to head south. When I first saw this thing, I thought it was a coyote, just a really big coyote. It was nearly 5 feet tall, on all fours, caught in my trap, running around creating a dust cloud, and then it stopped and looked right at me. I now use a Duke No. 3 leg hold trap, which allows me to catch a variety of animals. Anyway, I slammed on the brakes, my truck stalled, and I was fumbling for the keys to start it because it's a manual. It's an old farm truck with a carburetor and a lot of afterburner. When it realized this, it lunged at me and roared. I noticed that it had a hand, not a paw, caught in my trap. It was probably looking for the dead rabbit I had in the bait hole next to the trap with its right hand. It then rose to its feet and ripped the 2 earth anchors. Right away, I had 24 inches in the ground. It took me a long time with a 10-pound hammer to get them in, but it pulled them out in 15 seconds flat. It seemed like an eon. And I knew my .357 Magnum wouldn't be able to stop it if it came at me. I prayed to God that it would not come after me in my truck. I was looking at it in awe and shock when I noticed it had orange amber eyes. They weren't exactly glowing. Instead, they had the appearance of a cat's eyes in the dark. They could have been reflected by my headlights. I can't be certain. It took a step towards me and curled its upper lip, revealing its teeth. They were enormous, the longest of which had to have been 4 to 5 inches long. It growled at me and then vanished in the blink of an eye. I was terrified to death. Then, as I mentioned earlier, I slammed the truck into gear and spun the tires to get out of Dodge. It seemed like an eternity, but it couldn't have been more than 30 seconds. Later, I returned with an Indian friend. I grew up with him, and had faith in him. He told me some stories passed down through his grandparents' tribe and mentioned a loup-garou or a French werewolf. He also told me how fur trappers were chased off the land in the Rockies by this creature on August 27, 2016, when my 10-year-old grandson was sitting in a car in a restaurant parking lot waiting for his paternal grandmother. He noticed a large creature across the street on a sidewalk, which I estimated to be 7 to 8 feet tall from talking with him. It was walking on 2 legs towards a wooded area, at end of a sidewalk, when it vanished into the brush. The creature didn't seem concerned about my grandson because it wasn't in a hurry. When I asked him about what he saw, he described a canine-type dogman with red eyes. He was about 30 feet away from the creature. The city is semi-rural, with many pockets of woodland and forest. The area where he saw the creature is surrounded by trees and has paved roads and sidewalks. The encounter I'd like to share is not my own, but that of my mother. When I was young, she used to tell me stories about strange things she had seen in her life, and I remembered this Dogman type of encounter while watching many Dogman shows on YouTube. There isn't much information about this encounter, but you might be interested in the fact that it happened in Sacramento, California, around 1953, not far from our state's capital. Using Google Maps to get an idea of where you are and how the land looks. The sighting area was approximately 1,000 feet to the west and perpendicular to the American River. Across from the east bank of the river. The state capital is only about 2,000 miles east. As a result, this occurred relatively close to a densely populated area. My mother recalls lying on the couch watching television when she was about 12 years old. That's when she noticed a terrifying dog face peering through a small window. The window was on or near the door. This is something I'm not sure about. In any case, the head she described had to be about 2 to 2.5 feet above the ground. She hid her fearful expression behind her pillow. She sneaked a peek after a minute or so, assuming she was hallucinating. She felt a little better when she saw it was gone. Then she noticed it was looking through a higher window. Its head was about 4 to 4.5 feet above the ground at this point. There was nothing outside that window for a dog to stand on, according to her recollection. She fled to another room in terror at that point. She has no recollection of what happened after that. She describes the animals as dark gray with glowing red eyes, panting or baring their teeth. She didn't see the body, but she got the impression it was slim. Unfortunately, she has no recollection of the time of day, month, or season. My parents tell me that there are probably some American Indian burial grounds in the area because excavations near the river have yielded Native American arrowheads and other artifacts. I even asked my mother if there were any cornfields nearby, because that had to be mentioned in previous encounters. She only mentioned the small patch of corn in their own backyard. That does not, in my opinion, qualify. The area around my grandparents' house was not particularly forested. The surrounding area consisted mostly of large fields with a few horses and cattle. The area around the river is now wooded, and it was probably much more so in 1953 than it is today. Someone allegedly took a dusk or night shot picture of the Tower Bridge in 2009 and happened to see a flying humanoid shape or something off of the bridge as I was walking out of the Jedediah Smith Redwoods State Park in the Stout Memorial Grove on a Monster Quest episode about the Mothman. It has a circumference of about 1 mile. I was going to go to the left and circle around, but 2 young guys started walking off trail to a large tree. So I turned right, 50 feet down the trail, and heard a loud roar mixed with 2 screams, followed by dead silence. I assumed it was the 2 missing guys, but I didn't hear any laughter after that. My arm's hair stood up, wondering what it was. I immediately turned around to leave because it was getting late, around 8:40 p.m., and the sun was setting. I noticed a black figure about 120 feet down the trail from where the 2 young men were standing earlier. Because it was about 7 feet tall and backlit by the sun, I initially thought it was a bear standing up. A branch partially obscured the face, and it was too far away to smell. I took 2 quick photos of it before leaving. I didn't realize what I had photographed until I looked at them later, in October 1972, after my husband, our 2 children, my brother, and I had left Leavenworth, Kansas. We were on a camping trip in our 1968 Volkswagen van to Beaver Lake, an Arkansas recreation area. When we arrived, we discovered a fairly remote campsite at the far end of the park. We needed to be alone because the babies woke up frequently during the night and needed to be fed. We didn't want to bother the other campers. My brother set up his tent next to the van shortly after we arrived at our campsite. The rest of us planned to sleep in the van. The campsite was in an area with a horseshoe-shaped rocky terraced ledge that rose from 50 feet to around 100 feet as it curved around behind the 4 campsites. Due to mature trees in thick brush, daylight had difficulty penetrating our spot. That night was fast-forwarded. It was around 3:30 a.m. on the ridge. I heard some animal sounds that I mistook for coyotes. The babies were sleeping and everything was quiet. Otherwise, I peered out the window but couldn't see what was making noises because it was so dark. I was still hearing odd yips and house noises. I was lying back in the back seat. A huge crashing bang on the van wall right next to my head followed moments later. My husband awoke from a deep sleep. My brother dashed out of his tent and into the van with us. We were all in a panic, looking in every direction, trying to figure out what had hit the van so hard. Finally, my brother yelled that he saw something moving behind the van. We all turned just in time to see a large shadow moving from left to right about 20 feet behind the van. For about 20 minutes, none of us had seen any movement out there. My husband and brother went out to look for damage to the van but found none. We then heard pounding footsteps coming from the brush about 50 feet behind us. My husband turned on the headlights and stepped on the brake pedal for the rear light as the guys slid back into the van's front seat. There was an immediate uproar. When he started the engine, we could see a hairy thing 10 feet away coming toward the van in the glow of the headlights. Its silver-tipped hairs glistened in the light as it approached. It had a grayish streak running down its back to its buttocks. The creature walked on 2 legs, stood about 7 to 8 feet tall, and had a barrel chest and skinny legs. I can't tell you what its eyes looked like because it never gave us a good look at them. I realized the face was not a plaque at all. It had a dog-like appearance. It had tufts of fur on top of its ears, and its movements and overall body structure were very human-like. It moved smoothly and quickly around the back of the van, following the base of the ridge away from us, and then it vanished. A threatening huff and a low rumbling growl like a dog gone insane. My husband and brother dashed out of the van to get a better look. That's when a hail of gravel rained down on us. My husband and brother sped back into the van, destroying the road in the process. I kept looking out the back window, and they kept looking in their rearview mirrors, but neither of us saw it again. What we had seen did not appear to be a Sasquatch. It had a dog-like face and was too slim in the body. P is still with me. T.S. Day-like feelings continue to this day, despite the fact that I was 17 years old at the time. My parents had driven my younger brother and sister to Tucson for the day. We lived in a trailer outside of Sierra Vista in a rural area. As the oldest son, I was responsible for feeding and caring for 2 horses, 2 dogs, a cow, and chickens on the small amount of land we had. It was a stormy monsoon rain with thunder and lightning, but like monsoons, it raged and then settled into a lull before raged again. I was about to settle down and watch a good movie when my 2 dogs started barking and wouldn't stop even when I told them to calm down. For the previous week or so, my dogs had been acting up and barking a lot at night. I attributed this to 2 coyotes I heard howling in the middle of the night. So I grabbed my father's rifle and only 1 bullet in case I needed to shoot to scare the coyote away or kill it if it was rabid. I set the loaded rifle against the wall near the back door and turned on the floodlights outside the trailer, which had just stopped raining. So I looked out the window near the front door and saw our 2 horses and cows staring through the front door to the trailer's back door, where the dogs were barking. I assumed they were afraid of the coyotes. So I grabbed the rifle and went to open the back door, but as I got closer, I heard my dog whimpering and crying. Now I'm wondering if it's a pack of coyotes. So I put a few bullets in my pocket, reasoning that if I didn't like what I saw, I could load them. When I opened the door, the strangest thing happened. My two dogs rushed past me to the center of the trailer and hunkered down in the kitchen, leaving mud all over the floor from their paws. And I'm irritated because now I have to clean this up, so I shut the door and went to try to get my dogs out, but they wouldn't budge and squirmed out of my arms when I grabbed them. They were scared. I was furious at the coyotes and grabbed the rifle to chase them away or kill them. Because the trailer is built on a block foundation, the front and back doors are accessed via a set of small stairs. By the way, I'm 56 years old. I opened the back door and was about to step out when I noticed a set of eyes looking back at me out of the darkness. From the top of my head in the trailer to the ground is about 7 feet or so, and here is a set of eyes looking at me level and square on. I believe Don Coyote is on the small gravel hill. It's a bird on a messed up peat bush or we used to pave the road. But I was thinking to myself that the moonshine was terrible and that it rained a lot. What kind of bird would nest on a mesquite bush, and why would a coyote be out in the rain? So I'm raising my rifle and drawing a bead on my eyes when lightning illuminates the night, all the sun. The lightning illuminates the small gravel hill that's about 6 feet high and the surrounding mesquite bushes, and the light winks out as quickly as it appeared from the lightning. Nothing was on the gravel hill, and there was no bird in any of the bushes. Then it occurred to me. Whatever it was tall and still looked at me. Dread crept over me as I realized the rifle only had one measly bullet and that if I missed, there was no way I'd be able to reload before it was on me. I kept the gun pointed at it as I quickly closed and locked the door, knowing that whatever was out there would never be able to withstand an attack. I shut the front door and turned on every light in the house. I grabbed all of the bullets, the 30-06 and the 22 rifle, and then went into the kitchen with the dogs to fully load each rifle. I hugged my dogs and hoped that whatever it was would leave and not attack. I stayed awake all night until my parents returned. My father was enraged that all of the lights were turned on. My father checked outside for possible coyotes, but whatever it was had vanished, and I could only hope it had vanished for good in July 2015 while skinning the valley floor for sheep. I noticed 2 loping figures about a mile from my house. I initially thought the figures were coyotes or stray dogs, but as they approached an old sunken vehicle, I realized they were about the size of the vehicle, nearly 8 feet long. On the reservation, no animal could be that large. I stood there watching the 2 figures until they vanished into the woods across the valley. It was getting dark, but the moon was bright enough that I didn't need a flashlight. I heard yelling as I walked down the mountain. It sounded like a howl or yell. I began to rush. When I arrived home, I locked the door and spent the night listening to the strangest sounds I'd ever heard. I'm pretty sure it was a skinwalker or a werewolf. 8. Back in the early 1980s, 4 of us decided to go down to the Snake River, which was about 5 miles from where we lived. There was a lot of sagebrush and hills in this part of Oregon. It was early winter, so there was only a light dusting of snow on the ground. We knew it would be a spectacular view of the river with the full moon that night. We were in a '68 Mustang, me, my husband, my sister, and her boyfriend, and we were so cool. We got some beer and weed, and we were just going to relax and enjoy the night. We left around 11 AM for a recreational area where people could camp and launch their boats, among other things. To get into the place, however, you must leave the main road and follow a dirt and gravel path down to the boat docks, which formed a loop onto the upper portion of the parking lot. Everything was fine, and the moonlight was bright enough that you could make out shapes around you. We had just parked the car and are now conversing. My husband smoked a joint and passed it to me. We were in the front seats, my sister and her boyfriend in the back, and just as I was about to take my hit, I noticed something move about 20 yards in front of the car. My initial thought was that it was a deer. As I turned to pass the joint again, I noticed it moving to the right of the car. My sister immediately realized something was wrong. She was about to inquire as to what was wrong when she noticed this object moving toward the back of the car. Take note that I had only taken a single hit. My sister didn't smoke or drink, and no one else had time to, so we were all sober. We both asked, "What is that?" When we told them that something was out there, they laughed until they noticed it moving around to the left of the car. At that point, I had goosebumps all over my body and a bad feeling about the situation. This thing moved back to the front of the car, but this time it was closer than before. At that point, I needed to get out there quickly because I was completely terrified, and the guys wanted to know what it was. This thing had circled the car again, and when it came in front of it again, my husband hit the headlights, but nothing happened. It had been right there a second before when he hit the headlight, and now it was on the right side of the car again, much closer than before. We just couldn't figure out what it was. My 13-year-old sister, as well as myself, were terrified by this point. We were yelling at my husband to get us out of there. He must have been terrified because he started the car, slammed into reverse, and spun out there backwards, heading for the loop so we could get back to the main road. We skidded around the loop, dropped down toward the boat docks, and began a slight climb up to the main road. We thought we were safe, but as we began to climb out of the headlights, the scariest thing I had ever experienced up until that point in my life happened. However, a creature appeared in plain sight. It stood upright like a person, but it was extremely skinny and covered in silvery brown hair. When the headlights hit it, it turned, and we were so close we could see some pretty good detail. This thing looked me in the eyes and I swear it was giving me a once-over, as if it was memorizing my face or something. Its eyes were dark and had the appearance of a madman. Pure evil and insanity seemed to be the only thing in them as soon as this happened, which couldn't have been more than a few seconds. My husband hit the gas as he was aiming straight for it, he later explained. He was attempting to strike it. It then moved so quickly that it was almost a blur before disappearing. Why? It was even caught in the headlights. I'm not sure. All I know is that we got out of there as quickly as we could. It was freezing outside, and there were no homes, businesses, or anything else in the middle of nowhere. We couldn't figure out what we were seeing. But all that came to mind was a werewolf. Many unsettling events occurred in that area, and I refused to return. 9. Hello, my name is Kale, and this is my first encounter with a werewolf. It happened when I was a young boy, between the ages of 8 and 11. I used to live in Estonia with my stepfather, mother, older sister, and younger brother. And our dog had gone to our summer home in the summer. My parents had purchased a beautiful old house. We had to buy new windows because they didn't have any. So one night, my sister and I decided to sleep in a tent. So our stepfather pitched the tent, and we spent the night inside. I was concerned because I had heard that the forest near her house was home to bears. But my mother assured me that bears do not approach humans, and she was correct. It wasn't a bear that I saw. I needed to use the restroom around midnight, while my sister was sleeping, so I got out and walked a long distance away from the house. When I was done, I heard a howl and screeching sound. I looked around but found nothing. I assumed it was all in my head because I adore werewolves and wolves, but there were no wolves in our forest. Not that I would know, but I had asked my mother because I had the impression that something or someone was staring at me and watching me. I was about to return to the tent when I heard a scream that still haunts me. It was a deer scream, but it sounded like it was drowning. After a few moments, I heard a rustle in the bushes. I looked toward the large bush nearby, which was about 50 feet away, and saw an animal with red-yellow glowing eyes staring at me. I thought it was a neighbor's dog, but they lived a few miles away and the dog wasn't that big, so I was startled because my second thought was a bear, and I didn't move because I knew you couldn't turn your back on a wild animal, so you had to walk slowly backwards. But when I tried, I hurt my foot, and that thing mobbed me so loudly that I couldn't walk away. Knowing it wasn't a bear made me nervous. Bears do not growl in that manner. I stood there, staring at this thing, and I began to smell a rotten stink mixed with blood. It growled once more, this time louder. A few minutes had passed, which seemed like hours. But then something happened that I can only imagine. I saw what it looked like as it stood on its back legs. I was a big fan of werewolves, as I previously stated, but I never expected to meet one. It was approximately 8 to 8.5 feet tall, with red-yellowish eyes covered in, for the upper body had longer, further in the lower part, and it appeared to be a man. But it was bigger, had a tail, and had the head of a wolf or a German shepherd. That thing kept staring at me and getting closer. It had black claws and brown fur, and it sniffed me from about 5 feet away before stopping. It showed me its teeth by opening its mouth, and I saw how blood covered its teeth. Because I was crying, I believe it saw how terrified I was. It then turned around and began walking toward the forest. But before it ran into the forest, it turned around and looked at me, as if checking to see if I was still watching it howl. When it was gone, I was able to move my body and walked to my tent, my heart pounding in my chest. When I finally got in, I could feel tears streaming down my cheeks. I couldn't believe what I saw, when I kept thinking about it. So I tried to fall asleep, and when I woke up in the morning, I wasn't sure if it was real or if I had an intense dream because it felt so real, and at night there was a full moon, and when I checked my foot, I saw a wound that I got the night before, and I believed it was real. I haven't told anyone yet because I don't like it when people say I make stuff up like in my other stories, but I actually saw it. I'm not getting any older after watching videos of true werewolf encounters. I think so. I actually saw a werewolf. Of course, I haven't seen any more of them. But who can say?